You want to be happy. I do too. We all do. It's one of the universals of human nature. What I want to do in today's video is to look at one aspect of happiness as revealed in some psychological studies and what that has to do with the Dharma of Buddhism. Now, I think when we come to happiness, most of us, in sort of an unthinking way, will associate being happy with a sort of a pleasant state of mind that sort of hangs around with us when we're lucky. And we may associate that pleasant state of mind, let's say, with pleasant things, with pleasant experiences, with pleasant sights and sounds. And so, making that association, we think, well, in order to be happy, what I have to do is to make sure that I'm surrounded by things that are pretty and things that sound good and things that taste good, and then I'll always be happy. Unfortunately, it's not quite so simple. In particular, we tend to get inured to the pleasures of pleasant things around us. It's the equivalent of what they call a hedonic treadmill. That is, as we find nicer things to surround ourselves with, we get bored of them, we get used to them, and we feel like we're in the same situation we were before and we want to find better things. That's really not the proper route we should be taking. Now, then, if that doesn't work, what does? This is only something that's only begun to be studied in the last few years in psychology. And we're only beginning, as a result, to get an idea as to what makes people truly happy. But one of the things that we should keep in mind is that it's complicated. There's a lot of moving parts in what makes us happy. One person who studied this in some detail is Professor Sonia Lubomirsky, who works out in California. And what I'll be discussing today is found in one chapter or part of one of her recent books. I'll leave a link to the book down below in the show notes in case you're interested in hearing more. And one of these aspects to happiness is to find a purpose in life, find a goal. Now, we might think that that's a relatively simple and straightforward thing. It's easy to find a goal if we put a few seconds into thinking about it, perhaps. But it's not, again, not quite as easy as that, because not every goal is really going to be satisfactory to this end. In particular, many of us will, for example, in today's society, think that the goal that they are expected to have, or indeed the goal that many people do have nowadays, is one of, let's say, making more money or becoming more famous. However, these are really not goals that are intrinsically satisfying. These are goals that, while they provide things that are useful to us, at the end of the day, simply making money, simply becoming more famous or more praised, more widely praised, these are things that are not intrinsically satisfying on their own. Again, there are ways that we can gain things, perhaps, that make us satisfied in the near term, and that's one of the reasons why people tend to go for them. But the goals that we have to, or that we should consider when thinking about making ourselves happy, are intrinsically satisfying goals. Goals such as helping people out, such as perhaps gaining a skill, perhaps deciding to exercise for a certain amount every day, or meditate for half an hour a day or more. Things like these that are satisfying on their own are the kinds of goals that I think Lubomirsky believes that we should look towards. One of the additional benefits of these intrinsically satisfying goals is that they're goals that largely depend upon our own effort. Goals such as making more money, becoming more famous, or more praised widely in the community, these depend upon other people, depend upon other factors outside of our direct control, even insofar as we have control even over ourselves. But as we rely upon the external world to fulfill our goals for us, we're taking things out of our own hands. We're leaving things up to the whims of the society in which we live, and that is liable to also make us less satisfied in the longer term. We can add to that indeed, as we may see, many people who attain goals such as making money or becoming famous, once they actually attain those things, insofar as they do, oftentimes they're at a loss. They're actually no happier than they were when they started out. In fact, the dissatisfaction that may have gotten them started is simply revealed in more direct detail once they achieve the wealth or fame that they had been looking for. That's because, again, these goals are not themselves intrinsically satisfying. Now, so what we want to look for are goals that are more or less under our own power, under our own control, that involve the sorts of ends that are satisfying to us while we're pursuing them. In other words, that make us happy along the route. And that's going to be different for different people. Some people will find it intrinsically satisfying, let's say, to practice playing an instrument or to do woodworking every day. They don't necessarily need to gain an enormous amount of wealth or fame or praise by doing so. They simply find these processes intrinsically satisfying. That's the kind of goal we want to go for. Other people, of course, will not. And so it's up to each of us individually to decide what kind of thing fits into our own personality, into our own lifestyle. But having said that, what does this have to do with the Buddhist Dharma? Well, Buddhism is, I think, alone or nearly alone among major religions or philosophical systems in being oriented around this kind of intrinsic goal-seeking enterprise. In particular, the Eightfold Path is perhaps the most famous expression of the Buddhist path of practice, of this idea of having a goal or a purpose to our lives. Now, there are different ways we can orient ourselves towards this goal or purpose in Buddhism. For some, we will feel that the goal is a truly achievable goal of attaining enlightenment. That is to say, we'll undertake something like the Eightfold Path of practice with the expectation that at some point in this very life we may actually become enlightened. And that itself, of course, is intrinsically satisfying, intrinsically the sort of thing that will make us better people and happier. But it also may be, for many of us, that we don't see a goal as something, this goal of enlightenment as either truly achievable or at the very least truly achievable by us in this very life. Nevertheless, we may look upon the path of practice as itself intrinsically fulfilling. That is to say, fulfilling the ethical norms, meditating on a regular basis, which is part of the path of practice, gaining wisdom and insight into the world that surrounds us, being better people, being more generous, perhaps giving our time as best we can to help others. These are ways that we can fulfill that path while not expecting necessarily a particular end to be achievable. The path itself becomes the end. And not incidentally, pursuing goals such as this, pursuing having a purpose in our lives is or can be a wonderful way to make common cause with other people, with our neighbors and friends, or make new friends who are on the same path. In other words, we may think of a goal that's very, very personal to us, and that may be fine, but having a goal that involves us in a larger community can in fact be a better, more surer route towards happiness, because happiness is actually something that's best achieved in a larger social context of working with others. And indeed, this can be the case as well in the Buddhist path, where if we're at least lucky enough, we may have a sangha, a group of people who meditate, people who practice, that's local to us, that we feel congenial with. And if that's the case, then we can make what are called spiritual friends, kalyana mittas, that's the Pali term for it, with whom we can practice together and feel as though, therefore, we're not alone. When we have questions, when we have concerns, which inevitably come up, we'll have people to turn to, and simply people to turn to for support and kindness. Now, the Buddha himself actually made a comment back in these early texts where he was having a discussion with his attendant Ananda, and Ananda said that he felt that this kind of spiritual friendship, this having kalyana mittas like this, Ananda said, was half of the holy life, half of the life of practice. And the Buddha said, don't speak that way, Ananda. having these kind of spiritual friends is all of the life of practice, because these spiritual friends will help keep us on the right path. They'll help us to clarify our concerns and at least keep us company, which is really such an important part, I think, of a happy life. Another important thing to keep in mind on this kind of path of practice, whatever path we take, but certainly if we're talking about a path such as the Eightfold Path, is that we have to be open to changes along that path, open to deviations. We're not always going to live up to our own best aims. And if we're too rigid about our effort along that path or our desire to achieve whatever goal we found for ourselves, if we become too rigid in that, no matter what the goal is, we're going to be working against our own best interests, at least in attaining happiness. We're going to become rigid and ossified, brittle in our attempts to work forward. And that only is going to increase our stress level, only going to make us more hyper-vigilant of our own errors and mistakes, which all of us make. And as a result, it's going to lead towards things such as fomenting self-hatred or hatred of others who perhaps are not on our same path or not doing as well as we are. I think we know people like this, and it does present something of a pitfall on this kind of practice towards a goal or practice towards some sense of well-being. So what we have to keep in mind, I think, along while we're practicing, is that practice is always, again, has to be something that's fluid, something that's open to changes, something where we're open to the fact that we're not going to be always perfect and not always going to be moving forward on this path, but sometimes going to be looping around, stepping back for a while and moving forward. I think if we can approach practice, if we can approach a goal in this way, a sense of purpose in this manner, that it will in fact become a great route towards happiness in our own lives. Now, Buddhism, at least early Buddhism, has some interesting things in general to say about what happiness really consists in and how it's important, or maybe, depending on how we understand it, how it's not important. And I did an actual earlier video on that, and I'll leave a link to it up here on the screen. I'd suggest checking it out if you want to learn more about happiness. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, take a look at my Patreon page. It's linked down below. And check us out. See if you want to join us. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video.